All right. Hi, good afternoon. I'm so glad to be here to reconnect with my wonderful friend Mohana, who I met in 2007 in Qatar, where she had already been for 2 years at that point. So she was my guide to navigating the desert, to staying sane, to having fun, and to remember that I was a writer, which is one of the things we're able to do for each other. It's so exciting that she's here and she's got 9 books published. I'm very proud of her and not too jealous. But she's been writing consistently and wonderfully for the last many, many years. Her books have won awards. The 2011 SheWrites Award, the Best Indie Award in 2013. She's written nonfiction and fiction books about life in Qatar, where again she's sort of an expert. We were just saying she sort of outlasted most of us out there. And I don't know, when I think of Mo, I just think of persistence. If there's anybody who is ever always working on like 6 projects at a time, that's your lady. And what's to me very admirable about that too is that she's always able to make good with them. You know, there are people who have ideas and then there are people who make things happen. And this is a woman who makes things happen. One of the awesome things she's made happen is really great literature, and she's going to share some of that with us this afternoon, reading from the Migrant Report, which I will let her tell you about. Just in case you need to know the credentials. Credentials are good. She's got a PhD from the University of Florida. She has taught at Qatar University, at Georgetown University, at Virginia Commonwealth University, and Northwestern University in Qatar. We are lucky to have her and lucky to listen to her words. Welcome, Mohan.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for donating some of your Sunday afternoon to come and hear about literature, and also to Malvern Books for hosting us. I love indie bookstores. They need more support, so tell everyone you know about your favorite indie store. I'm going to start by reading a little bit just to set the tone, maybe. This is my first crime novel, and I started writing in the genre of crime because even though it's a very popular form of literature, which that was actually one of the first reasons, because writers like to be read. And so one of the reasons I went into fiction, even though I have a PhD, is because no one ever read my dissertation, including my mother, to whom it was dedicated. So that was a crushing blow, as you can imagine, having spent years on something that is languishing in a library somewhere. So I got into fiction, and for me, I've always been a big admirer of Scandinavian crime fiction, so Henning Mankell, Stig Larsson, Joe Nesbo, because crime is a way of critiquing society. So while you're being entertained, you're also getting the social critique. And there's so many possibilities, from who the victim is, who the murderer is, who the cop is. And there's a long tradition in Scandinavian fiction of looking at the failure of utopia. So you have these really small states that are very wealthy, that make all these promises to their citizens, but yet somehow there are lots of dead bodies and lots of unhappy people. And so I saw a lot of similarities between the oil-rich nations of Scandinavia and the oil-rich nations of the Arabian Gulf. Same small population, same promises, same problems. So that's how I came to crime. Writing it, that is, not a life, not a life of crime, not yet. So this part is, we meet one of our central characters. I love to write ensemble casts because it gives you like a 360 view of the story, and it's also, I think it's more entertaining for the reader. And as a writer, it's easier to leave, you always want to leave people hanging on the hook when you go into the next chapter. And so my editor, I'm just going through a set of notes for a revision, and he's like, this chapter does not have a dangling ending. Good job on this chapter. So with an ensemble cast, you can always get to that, what's going to happen next, and then you take someone to a completely different stage where something else is happening. So this is Ali. He's the policeman in the story, and poor Ali, he has a deformity. He had aspirations of being in the intelligence service, but he's just been demoted. The book starts with that requisite awkward meeting with his superior, and the superior says, sorry, Matt, you're being reassigned. So we see Ali has been reassigned to the traffic police, which is sort of like the lowest level of policeman that you can be, I think, in pretty much any nation. But then something happens. So I'll just read to you this thing. Ali's phone vibrated across the dashboard, alerting him to the dozens of unanswered messages. The SUV inched along the main artery of the business district. Steel and glass skyscrapers towered 40 or 50 floors above him, the floor-to-ceiling windows glinting. An elevated metal tunnel a few feet wide ran parallel to the road. This was a mini version of the train that would take the hundreds of office workers home and off the streets. For now, though, the tunnel was a system to move the dirt dredged up to make space for the underground transit. And he was stuck in the middle of rush hour. He idled at a red light, gazing at a building shaped like the helmet of ancient warriors, drooped over an entirely glass structure. The chain-link covering provided a screen against the unrelenting sun. He smirked at the blunt carved top. Maybe he needed a dirty mind to see these things. Or maybe he had body parts on his mind. He looked away. The building next to it was shaped like the funnel of a tornado, blue window crisscrossed with metal girders. Ali squinted at the ropes dangling from the top of the building. A man, no, several men, dangled in harnesses, their blue overalls, pricks of color swaying back and forth against the glass. So there are worse places to be than stuck behind people who don't know how to drive, he thought. He turned the air conditioning vent so he felt the blast brush his stubble. He could outgrow it and fit in with any of the other traffic officers, hairs curling on their cheeks. The phone persisted with an insistent buzz like the sound of a trapped bee. His cousin, Hassan, wanting to know where Ali was, what he'd eaten for lunch, and when he was coming to the Majlis. If Ali declined another invitation, what he was doing instead. The fatigue of the day pulled at his eyelids. Since his new assignment, he felt as though he had been dodging rubber bullets in training, not seeing to actual police work. He squinted as an orangish fog blanketed the road. Exactly what he needed, a shamal, an unseasonable dust storm that would turn congested roads to gridlock. He drummed his fingers on the wheel. White SUVs were swerving to the right into the emergency lane and overtaking the smaller sedans. You're not 15 anymore, he thought, the memory of the boy on the bridge floating before him. Technically, he had the right to find these drivers. That was the result of his military training. The phone continued to dance, dropping into the console between the seats. He glanced at it. The station. Ali groaned. He looked up at the SUV ceiling. If only there were a vial of patience hanging there. He could no longer make out the men dangling in their moronic task. Yet, he knew they were still there, if they were lucky. He grit his teeth. Ah, for a knife with which he could stab out his eye and thereby avoid answering. Salam alaikum. Alaikum assalam, the captain rushed through the greeting. You've got to get to Street 45 now. I'm on the other side of town. Ali resented the way his voice rose like a boy in a fight with his father. Plus, my duty's finished. Call someone else to do the prostitute patrol, he thought. The industrial area housed most of the laborers brought in to work on the country's infrastructure. For years, this had meant widening streets, erecting skyscrapers, and building malls. Now it meant hundreds of men arrived every day to assemble the Olympic stadiums. With them came low-level crime, contained among their countrymen on the fringes of the city. Bootleg alcohol made from cleaning supplies, and housemaids making extra reals on desperate men. These were the two most frequent worker-related incidents. It's a death. Green lights turned to yellow flashing ones, signaling the red was next. The driver 2 cars in front of Ali halted, reluctant to risk a $2,000 ticket for running the signal. It was yellow! He slammed on his brakes. The red Sunny immediately in front of him skidded to a stop, but not before his fender kissed the bumper of a black Mercedes with a smack. Where? Street 45. The captain's voice carried a tinge of impatience. Get over there to the MBJ workers and phone in after your interviews. The call ended without any further information. The drivers were out of their vehicles. A man in the white robes of the local gestured at the young woman in a skimpy tank top and black leggings. Ali decided not to stop. He had done his duty by the fender benders for the week. He angled the nose of the SUV into the emergency lane. After a few minutes, he pulled the entire vehicle in, incrementally increasing the pressure on the gas until the odometer read 120 kilometers. Neither of them had said it, but Ali knew the reason the captain had called him and not the Criminal Investigation Department was because all their files were checked and reviewed on a monthly basis by human rights organizations. You coming? Ali started when the sound of his cousin's voice filled the SUV. Hassan's number was up on the Bluetooth screen. He must have accidentally hit a button on the phone while talking to the captain, routing all future calls to the car's speakers. La, Ali said, using the curt Arabic no. Next to him, a blonde in a Range Rover was shaking her head as he sped past. Police, he yelled through the window. though they were closed. She flinched, turning away her frosted pink lips and massive sunglasses. What? Police business, Ali said to Hassan in a normal tone. Oh, what's going on? Accident? I can't talk about it. I have to go outside the city, he added in case Hassan persisted. Heading to the scene of an accident could be a popular pastime for people with little else to do but drink endless cups of coffee at Starbucks and harass women in lingerie shops. Fine, but tomorrow, I'll call you back. Ali punched the disconnect button on the steering wheel. The highway curved under him, one branch extending right, the other left. He increased the speed on the straightaway past the dozens of furniture shops situated next to each other in the old style of a souk or market where similar items were grouped together. Ornate living room arrangements with brocade upholstery and gilt edges littered the storefronts. He kept speeding away from the center of the city, the skyscrapers of downtown disappearing from his rearview mirror. Swirling purple graffiti flashed by in the underpass, created by an artist flown in especially for the purpose. The Arabic scripted calligraphy was acceptable public art. No human forms to offend Islamic sensibilities. Expect amazing! He swept by an outdated Olympic bid campaign billboard as the SUV crested the highway exit. 4 empty lanes ushered him toward the industrial area, a place of garages and worker camps. Most of the heavy-duty trucks were scheduled for the night already, their drivers having lined them up on the empty dirt lots scattered throughout the area where the workers lived and garages fixed cars. His phone buzzed. MBJ Camp flashed on the screen. Ali narrowed his eyes in the encroaching darkness. He pulled off the highway into the rabbit warren of neighborhood streets, cursing as he hit a pothole. The pavement here was broken in places, bumpy in others, worn away by the unending volume of cement trucks, dump trucks, and other heavy machinery. Here you could see the scale of a country under construction. Rows of diggers of various sizes, their yellow dulled by the dust, were lined up next to bulldozers and 18-wheelers. This was an encampment of sleeping building materials. Pay attention, he said to himself as the SUV bounced into another crevice. Out here, there were few streetlights, so he switched to high beams, blinding some guys who had been sitting on a dilapidated sofa propped against a low, unfinished wall. They scattered like baby camels, frightened by the purr of his engine. The pristine white Nissan meant someone with money. Ali pulled up to the camp's gate, thankful to be in uniform. Police. The MBJ holding was bigger than most of the worker housing, which was usually a few buildings grouped together and shared by dozens of men. Gated entry was unusual, but if the company was big enough, maybe they wanted to keep them separate from the thousands of other workers housed in the area. Fights were known to break out between those of different nationalities. Theft was rampant and rarely reported. Many of the men outside the makeshift holding area may have overstayed their residency permits, having fallen out with their sponsors. A scan of the doors told Ali there were hundreds of men housed here. Sir, the guard stammered. Let me in, Ali growled. The chain-link gate creaked open. He pulled behind the impoverished guard building, a clay-colored porta-cabin raised on a concrete platform with 2 double windows facing opposite directions, one onto the road, the other the interior of the housing. The guard was hovering at the driver's side door, so Ali had to open the door carefully to avoid hitting him. He towered over him, a slight man of indeterminable age, head full of black hair, eyes lifting up at the sides like the ends of an almond. Ali placed him as Nepalese. He wore the standard white shirt and black trousers, his belt cinched around a waist his sisters would have envied. Where is it? The guard's wide eyes darted to Ali's face, the whites expanded. The body, where is it? Ali said more slowly. Usually the group 4 guys, the ones in uniform all over the city, had better English. But, as Ali knew all too well, there were always duds. We didn't know she was here. It's a woman? Ali swore mentally. Now he would have to solve a homicide and prostitution. No, the man stammered. He cowered, somehow making himself even smaller. Out with it, Ali's voice rose. Where is the body and what was a woman doing out here? There, someone shouted from the second story of the building across from them. That way. Ali ran. He didn't have a gun. Who needed one in a police station? The sand burned the lining of his throat. Concrete bit into his shoes. He dodged gaping holes here and there. A few guards were pointing to the building to his right. Ali curved like an arrow towards the stairwell. He ran smack into a dark figure, slight, maybe a boy, judging by the cry with which he fell away from Ali. There was an older man, an Indian, with black slacks and a button-down shirt, who threw himself in front of Ali. You! Ali shoved the man against the wall, hearing a sharp crack as the man's body hit the surface. Don't move. His stomach flip-flopped at the thought of the boy with this man. All the stories he had heard about the industrial area came flashing back. They were child's fables, ones told to keep you close to your mother's embrace, about someone, a woman or man, who wanted to steal children. When you were a child, you never asked why. Your eyes would be round with fear as your grandmother auntie told you about these stolen children, chubby and misbehaved, never seen again. Ali assumed they were always eaten. As an adult, he knew differently. Come here, he lowered his voice. I won't hurt you. The boy crouched, scooting backward, the black and white sneakers visible in the light from the courtyard. I won't hurt you, Ali repeated. Come. Behind him, the man bent over, groaning. The boy clutched the wall, the delicate wrist pushing until he could stand. Ali noted with mounting horror that the boy, whom he had originally assumed to be about 13 or 14, was in fact a very tall woman, whose angular face showed her equal dismay. She gathered the folds of her abaya around her, avoiding eye contact. What? We were leaving. She swept past him. Ali stepped aside, at the same time catching the arm of the man who was moving away from the wall. Can't you find somewhere closer to home to have your fun? The woman's dark eyes, with eyelashes as spindly as spider's legs, flashed at him. Don't be disgusting. He's as old as my father. Disgusting? Do you know where you are? Ali spread his arms, dropping the trembling limb of the Indian, who he now realized was the woman's driver. He swiveled around to assure himself she was the crazy one, and saw they had an audience. The other guards were a few feet away. Men had come to the railing across from them, dozens of eyes watching them like they were animals in a zoo. Prostitution was the second most frequent crime among the laborers, though it was usually Filipino women. There were stories, Ali knew, rumors circulated about a Land Cruiser full of local women who prowled the industrial area looking for men they could experiment on, paying for the pleasure. This one was alone. There's a body, her shoulders slumped, though the defiance seemed to drain from her. Ali saw again the signs of youth that had first caused him to think she was a teenage boy. She may not have been 13, but she wasn't much older. 17, he guessed by the sound of her voice. Then he glanced away, embarrassed when his eyes instinctively sought out the curves beneath her abaya for confirmation. Where? He dragged the driver with him into the nearest open door, figuring she couldn't leave without him. This caused another flurry of activity from the guards behind him. Ali entered the room to find 7 men crouched on filthy mattresses. He steeled himself against the stench of so many unwashed bodies. There, she said, when I came in here to hide, he was like that. The man was in the standard blue jumpsuit, but for the angle of his head, you might think he was sleeping, not fortunate enough to have a bed. Ali stomped on a cockroach heading toward the body. He opened his mouth to apologize. His sisters would have screamed in horror at the spattered remains. The girl ignored the cockroach. She was transfixed with sympathy for the other men in the room. Ali had seen such gazes of pity from children for the ego before slaughter. Ali's phone rang. Probably heart attack or exhaustion from heat. He scanned the worn faces of the men around him. His uniform was already sticking to his underarms. I'll get him to the morgue. Maybe one of them did it. Her voice was husky, like she'd been crying. The smell of oud, flowery, hung in the air. Ali remembered he had 2 problems. What were you doing here? He switched to Arabic. He resisted the urge to empty the room. Where would these men go? This dingy room was all they had. I came to interview someone. Maybe we'll volunteer here. These men need help. Ali snorted. Local girls don't volunteer. Her eyes flashed. I do. We don't all want to make cupcakes for our bias. In her reply, he heard the hints of an accent, someone unfamiliar with the inflections of vowels in the local dialect. Your mother's American? This would also explain the do-gooding, non-frivolous tendencies. No, she retorted, the full force of her tension washing over him like a breeze. Ah, American educated. He was finally fitting the puzzle pieces together. You wanted to talk to somebody for your blog? My class assignment. The door cracked open. The group 4 guys peered in. You need to get out of here. Ali motioned her to the doorway. Before the foreman comes. That seemed to get her attention. Her hand swept the crown of her head, drawing her headscarf under her chin. There was a long black strand of hair across her forehead. He resisted the urge to tell her to cover it. He was nothing to her after all. Not her father, or her brother, or husband. Out, he repeated, wondering where that last association had come from. His cousins had been married by her age, of course, many of them with a child, a year later. Won't you ask them what happened? She moved toward the door, her driver trailing her, clutching his wrist. They should send a doctor. I know what to do, he said. I'll take care of this. I thought it was all lies. She stared at the men leaning against the railing, who turned away when her eyes landed on them. All those articles. But now, she caught a sob in her throat. This is our camp. In the courtyard, he leaned in to catch the last whispered confession and peered more closely. You're Jabber's daughter? She drew away as if he had slapped her. You know my father? You know mine, he laughed. You're probably too young to have met him. Allah yarhamha. He sobered up when he realized her age. We're cousins. Our grandmothers are sisters. Her stricken look said she wasn't amused at the coincidence. Take him to a doctor, Ali gestured, probably broken. Tell them he fell. She swept him with the kind of look he reserved for petty criminals. For the first time, Ali realized she wasn't craning her neck to look at him, but meeting his gaze. She nodded, turning, taking the driver's arm in hers. He protested, but she supported the older man, matching her gait to a shorter one as they shuffled toward the entrance. Get him up, Ali shouted above the voices rising behind him. We have to take him to the morgue. May God grant him peace, Ali prayed as they turned the prone figure over. The boyish face couldn't have been much older than the girl who had left. Glass clinked as a man stuffed an object behind a pillowcase on the lower bunk. Show me, Ali said sharply. The slight man, several heads shorter than Ali, shuffled forward as the other occupants shrank away. He produced a squat bottle of cologne that read Luma in cursive script. Ali exhaled. The man's eyes were red-rimmed, his pupils unfocused. Don't drink this. Ali took the bottle from the man's limp hand, which gave it up without protest. This bad. Ali turned in a circle, holding the cologne above his head like a trophy. Bad for eyes, bad for remembering. He pointed at his eyes and head. The men looked at their shoes. If you get really bad bottle, you die. He thumped his heart to indicate it would stop beating. The men's eyes were wide like a sheep stacked in the back of a pickup truck, driven through the city from the farm to the butcher. The ring of his phone burst through his dark thoughts, which were wavering between pity and disgust. Captain Ali, the pause on the other end reminded Ali this was not a title he could use. Yes, he said to cover his dismay. This is Khalifa. Sir, Ali kicked at a stone on the lip of the sidewalk. Have you reported to MBJ camp? Yes. Ali gazed at the laundry hanging on the strip, draped in front of the doors. One body appears to be poor health, no signs of distress. This is an internal security matter, Khalifa intoned. I asked him to send you rather than a regular officer. Keep me informed. Ali's heart thudded. Was the captain saying this was his way to prove that he was worthy of the ISF? I need eyes and ears in the industrial area, Khalifa continued. The human rights agencies keep harping about these double contracts and upholding the law. You're trained. You keep me informed when there's something new. The call ended. Hope fluttered in Ali's chest like a caged butterfly.